Andy Benouali. I am a director in the UK banking team at Pega Systems. And as he said, some of you who might know Pega Systems will know us as a BPM or a workflow vendor, the guys that used to try and sort out all of the problems in your back office. We have grown up a lot and changed really the market that we serve over the last certainly 3 or 4 years. So the way that I would categorize us today is we're a full customer engagement suite solution provider, so that's sales, marketing, and service, plus that heritage of connecting into back office, into outcomes. And we were also very fortunate to acquire a company called Cordiant 6 or 7 years ago now, which gave us a fantastic AI capability. So I've sat on that side of the stage in plenty of presentations. I'm not going to do a whole, here's like the map of the world where we have offices or our numbers. We can talk about all of that stuff later on. I just wanted to talk to you through some concepts and some of the things that we see with our customers when they're talking about really kind of transforming customer experience, what that means, some of the challenges, and then some of the things that we talk to them about how they think about doing that better. So probably the first thing is that it's bloody difficult. The time of being able to just pick up a single channel or do something in one place to be able to transform customer experience is probably gone. We're now talking about a set of initiatives that cross multiple functions, lots of channels, lots of different customer types, and basically a lot of organizational politics, funding, and all of the fun and games that we probably all recognize. So, this isn't an easy thing to do. What we tend to see is that because it's not easy to do, and because there are so many variables and interdependencies to actually achieving kind of transformation of customer experience, what a lot of customers go towards is let's pick something that we can control, something fairly discrete. It might be a piece of technology for a piece of customer experience in a channel, or maybe automating a particular process. And whilst that feels like it's going to get us there quickly, and whilst it feels like we have some control so we can deliver some benefit, actually there's some long-term impacts to doing it that way, which is primarily that we continue to disconnect the customer experience. So the more pieces of technology we have in our channels and in our back office and in our processes, the more difficult it is. The slower it is to change because we've got so much technical debt, and IT kind of jumps up and down every time we want to do something that's kind of the business is driving. And more importantly than that, it kind of kills the customer experience. So the typical one, and I was talking to a customer probably maybe about 2 weeks ago. They've implemented a chat bot, right? All the rage, everybody wants a chat bot, bots everywhere. What they found was that whilst some of the engagement was pretty good in their online channel, they were getting a knock-on impact in their customer service center, which meant that they actually taking more calls. Those calls from customers who were far more irate than they otherwise would have been because they couldn't get the chatbot to work. So a fix in a channel, which appeared to be doing its own thing, it was discreet, had a great business case, firework culture, everybody kind of clapped and stood back when it went off. But actually, it had a big knock-on impact. And that's partly to do with the way that we think about it. So, fragmentation is really the enemy of what we're trying to do with customer service. And as I said just a second ago, those impacts of doing things in silos, doing things in a disconnected fashion is really much more profound. But it's difficult because all we're trying to do really is to get something landed, to get something working so that we can improve the customer experience. The other people that really suffer are the customers. It's painful for everybody involved. It's painful for your customers to have that disjointed experience. It's painful for your organization because you spend more money and more time trying to change. And it's painful for all of the people in this room and all of your colleagues who are just trying to get through organizational treacle to really mobilize all of that. So now that I've got everybody suitably depressed and thinking that there's no way forward, There is a way to get there. There's multiple ways to get there, undoubtedly. But we tend to have a view that there's a few things that you can do, and I won't necessarily talk about technology, but more about capabilities that platforms need to have to kind of get you to that point. So it's probably fair to say, and it's no surprising statement, that the three things that you probably need to think about when you're putting in a platform that kind of creates connectivity across your organization is the first piece. It has to allow you to be totally customer focused. And as the people who have been on this morning before me have eloquently said, it's really easy to say that, but what does it really mean? And we'll unpack that in a little bit more detail. The second thing is that when you think about designing journeys, when you think about transformation, it's also very, very easy to compartmentalize. Compartmentalize because of control or politics or funding or benefit delivery. But actually, the only way that you get true benefit is if you focus on the things that customers really care about, which is the end of that journey, the thing that they wanted to do or the thing that they wanted to achieve. And then the final thing, which isn't really about technology, but it can be affected by technology, is really how do you drive a major cultural shift towards those first two? Because it's not enough to simply talk about putting a piece of kit or technology in, and then, as I said, the fireworks culture of everybody stands back, you light the fuse, everybody claps when it goes off, and then you move on to the next thing. That doesn't really help drive true change over time and sustainably. So we'll just kind of go into each one of these in a little bit of detail. So the first thing is really how do you become customer obsessed? And I think at the core of it, really, to me and to us at Pega, it means making every single thing that you do be a one-to-one interaction. So that could be a one-to-one interaction on one of your channels. It could mean treating the customer in their own specific way for their own specific journey, because what we tended to do is design customers' journeys like this in the past. Incredibly linear. I have a defined front point and end point. My job as an organization is to make it as efficient, as clean, as easy as possible. But the reality of what a customer journey looks like today is much more like this. And by the way, unintentionally, I was trying to make this fit into that, and even that wouldn't work the way I wanted it to. So if there's any proof that even in technology there's adversity to try and make you represent a customer journey. So this customer journey isn't a customer journey in the way that we would know it at all. It's a set of multiple touch points that a customer could come to us or we could go to them with at almost any time, and those touch points are punctuated then by business processes that we have put either in the customer's hands or that we control. But those processes are intended to do some really sensible things, like gather some data, like make sure that we're selling suitable and policies or products that customer is eligible for. But in the end, what we're trying to do, and this is really what it comes down to, customers don't care about journeys. They don't care about processes. I would even argue they don't necessarily care explicitly about experiences. They know whether they're good or not. They know that they have a good experience or they don't have a good experience, but nobody gets up saying, I want to have a good experience with my bank today. Customers care about outcomes. And so when you're thinking about, how do we make this happen? So one of the things that as I said, we inherited was this really cool AI platform from Cordiant, which we've done a huge amount of work on. But this is really about a concept of how do I treat that customer as a single individual at every interaction? And the way that we do that is we talk about building a customer brain. So most organizations don't necessarily have a single institutional memory or single institutional view of that customer and all of the things that they do with us, what relationships we have, and so on. So when a customer presents, or when you want to talk to a customer, so it could be through a channel, it could be because something's happened in their data, it could be because you happen to make an outbound call. The first thing you want to know is, well, who is this customer and what data do we have? So Blair talked about 5,000 touch points. That's a huge amount of data that we have. When did we see them last? What was the interaction like? Did they accept what we told them, or did they not accept what we told them? Did they complain? And all of that's really important because it gives you a view of what's our kind of relationship with this customer. The second thing you want to do is you want to get context. So things like behavioral science, things like how we think we're going to apply statistical modeling to that person. Really simple things. Propensity to accept a new product, or how likely are they to leave us as a customer. But also, that kind of, what do we think we're going to do next? And that's further supplemented by what I call the context engine. And that really comes down to what's happening right now. So if you imagine every time you interact with your mobile app, or every time you answer a question on the phone, or every time you interact with your online platform as a customer, you're telling that organization something about you, something about how you want them to interact with you, subliminally or not, or it may be very explicit. But all of that tends to get lost in this segmentation and kind of, let's treat people in buckets of customers. I don't want to be treated in a bucket. I have very specific attributes that mean that, I'm more or less likely, depending on what other people have done, to do something. But that context, the final piece of that jigsaw, is really, who am I, what am I doing, what do I want to do with you? And you can apply this principle across almost anything you can think of in terms of a decision or in terms of an action. So any point in time at which there are several options for your customer, so lots of products I could talk to you about, or a range of pricing that I could be exposing to you, or your likelihood to leave me as a client, a trite, etc., etc. You can actually apply this thinking to that. And so what we do is we talk about putting that right slap bang in the middle of the organization. But even that isn't enough. Because what you then need to do is you need to think about your journey and where you're punctuating that journey with this type of experience. So I feel bad for this lady here, by the way. So actually in that race, fantastic start. She was out of the blocks first. She was in her pickup phase. So any of you guys at sprinters, I know I look like a sprinter. Believe me, I'm not. In her pickup phase, she was out in front. And what happened towards the end is basically she dived for the line to try and beat her competitor, and that was the result. And that kind of feels to me a lot of the time like what we're doing with our customer journeys. Let's really improve the front-end experience. Let's make that digital experience as beautiful and as amazing as possible. And let's use all that data to really make it rich and fulfill. But what happens when a customer wants to actually execute a product or buy, let's say I wanted to, bundle up a set of products because actually I'm more likely to buy 3 products in the first encounter than I am to buy 1 because that's what suits my needs. And this is all about connecting the front to the back. This is all about, the heritage that Pega has, which is we see all of the pain and all of the suffering that goes on in operations and all of the kind of the downside of that from a customer experience perspective, but also from an operational efficiency perspective. So when you design those journeys, they need to be end-to-end. You need to have that end in mind, and they should flow all the way through. So gone are the days of, just enhancing the front part of the journey. The second thing is, and again, this isn't the one that I made, but my wife gave me the fantastic task of baking my daughter a rainbow cake. Thanks. This was like a couple of years ago. And in Pega, we have this concept of what we call, horrendously, the situational layer cake, right? Don't even get me started. But what it means is you build your business up in layers. So what makes us as individuals interesting, I think, but also what makes businesses complex is the element of dimensions. So many dimensions, different products, different geographies, different customer types, different channels. But when you actually strip all that back down and you're building those customer journeys, they have a huge amount in common. This is just, well, it was just, the same recipe to make the sponge cake. The only thing that changes is the colors that I use and the order in which I put them in. So when you think, what the hell's that got to do with a customer journey? Well, think about let's say you're a bank and you have a lending journey. The concept of gathering information, validating a decision, executing a decision, and then fulfilling on a product is exactly the same whether you're doing a credit card or a loan or a mortgage. All of those things are common, and yet we build so many intricacies because we think that actually that special journey needs to be treated in a special way. And this accelerates your delivery times a tremendous amount. So what you've got here is, it's actually a development screen from a Pega application. This is how we model the software. And as I said, this isn't a sales pitch, but what you need to keep in mind are really three things. One is, no pointer. So on the left-hand side is the start of the journey. I'm layering all these. Underneath those are tasks or processes that I have to run through. And then as I get towards the end, this is my outcome. So you never ever design a journey that doesn't have an endpoint, a customer outcome or a business outcome. But what you also do is you say goodbye to the days of exception versus happy path. Because back to our, this is what customer journeys look like, there is no such thing as a happy path or an exception. There's just the journey that I'm going to go on, and I could be mixing and matching between multiple ones. So when you build this, you're actually building it to manage all of those different eventualities. The other cool thing about this, and again, this is part of the AI platform, we don't code this up, so you don't have to build every single version in a channel or in a particular function. The machine does the coding for you, and that's a very different way of building applications. As you can see, it's significantly faster. But what it does do is it starts talking to this point about cultural shift. So I'm a big believer that you can keep doing what you've been doing, forever, and that's great if you want to get the same results that you got in the past. But the incremental change really isn't going to cut it, particularly for the banking industry, as we heard about from the piece around the PSD2 and open banking scenario. It's just not going to be big enough. It's not going to be a revolution enough. So there's a few just ideas, questions that I'll throw out there about some of the things that we see being an impediment really to that cultural change. So the first thing is, this concept that the business is over here and IT are over here and then operations are over here, and they kind of all do their own thing. We put them under a program umbrella and we ask them to share documentation and share business requirements documents and technical design documents, which I'm sure you all know and love. In any kind of agile methodology, you have the concept of collaboration, teams working together to model what the solution should look like. So you need a platform that actually allows for that. Hence the point about the modeling things in a visual way. The concept is that business, IT, and ops all sit together to say, how do we get the customer from this point to the end point? How do we get them to the outcome? What are all the things that need to happen across the entire journey or the entire experience to really make sure that we make that happen? The second point is, and this is one that is is a real difficult one, because it means almost an entire change in how we think about success. But I'm not going to ask you to show hands because we'll probably get millions of different answers. But the reality is, if the successful customer outcome is the thing that we care the most about, and we are customer focused and we design with customers in mind when we build our platforms around outcomes and all the rest of those good things, how come all of those different departments have different KPIs? I don't mean variations of the same KPI, I mean totally different KPIs. So, that's one thing to think about, is when you set out on your transformation journey, or if you're trying to remobilize a transformation journey around any single experience, those KPIs are really critical. The other thing is, so most programs are funded by the kind of change the bank or change the business, run the business funding model. They tend to have a budget allocated with some resources and a business case that's signed off, and we go and do some stuff, and then it kind of falls back into another pot. Somehow it gets taken over. And what we don't really have is a funding model that allows for ongoing BAU, for ongoing change, for ongoing maintenance of that customer experience, particularly when it comes to technology implementations. I don't have an answer for it. I just think it's an interesting question. And then the final thing is, and this really comes down to structure. I don't think I've seen yet an organization, perhaps one bank in the US arguably, that has restructured or reoriented towards customer fully. And what I mean by that is, if you ask any traditional bank, traditional insurer, who owns the customer, you get the kind of the PC answer, which is, we all own the customer. But actually, when you look at all the disciplines and the technologies, the tooling, the people, the insights that drive better customer experience, you tend to find that they're totally fragmented. They're within business lines, they're within P&Ls, within different business functions. And this is really so if I was a management consultant and I knew how to change this, I think I would be making quite a lot of money, because this is an absolutely critical thing. But when you look at the startups and you look at the smaller organizations, this is the thing that they do entirely differently. They have the luxury of doing it that in large organizations, you don't have, which is you can be entirely customer focused in your structure and in the way in which you actually operate your business. But that manifests itself, and it's a really big point, and it's a really big key. Because otherwise it takes really strong sponsorship and change agents to go and fight all of those battles to make that transformation happen. So this is ultimately all, what we want to be doing. This is what it looks like, although I'm not sure anybody's felt like that after they've opened a bank account. But this is what you're looking for, right? This is what we want, because ultimately it means this. So we believe that we've got an approach and a platform that positions us really well to help do some of those things. Like I said, no big sales pitch, no big kind of features and functions stuff. Happy to discuss any of the results that we've seen from any of those approaches in terms of time to market or sales benefit, retention, customer satisfaction, and so on, and grab a coffee later on. But for now, that's me done.